Hello, ethics class. Again, it is good to see you. Today we'll be talking a little bit about ethical issues as they pertain to group counseling. Here's Pato again. He says hello. He's purring right now. Okay, I am going to set him down though and share my screen as usual. All right, let's slideshow. All right, let's talk about group work. So as you've learned at this point, ethical issues are present in every single type of counseling interaction we have, and group work is no exception. So some of the ethical issues in group work are around training, making sure that you have the knowledge and skills to perform group adequately. And we'll talk about some of the specifics as it pertains to group in a little bit. And then there are different groups that you would need training for, and those are task and work groups, psychoeducational groups, and counseling process groups. And each of these groups will look a little different. You are going to facilitate them differently, and they require different skills and knowledge. Those things you will learn in group class, so never fear, but those are just be aware that there are different skills needed for those. So in addition to getting the training that you will receive in group class, it's recommended that you engage in some personal psychotherapy if things come up, and that you self-explore and you're engaged in some groups yourself, which you will all participate in groups in practicum. You're required to be in a group in practicum, and you'll need to be in a training and supervisory group, which of course you will also experience in this program. So you will all have a university supervision group in practicum and internship. So one of the main things that we need to consider, of course, as we have discussed all throughout, is an awareness of diversity in group counseling. So we want to respect and appreciate different cultures. We need to seek out knowledge and increase our competence in areas that we're not aware of. We need to avoid stereotyping and making assumptions, and we need to be aware of our biases. So we're not saying even like little covert things that could be offensive. We don't want to engage in any microaggressions, like saying little stereotypical things. So, a deep awareness of our own biases and what a microaggression is, and understanding those things can help us not engage in them. So we also want to make sure that we're differentiating between all members of the group. Just because there might be two people of a specific cultural group, that doesn't mean that they're homogenous and the same. So we want to recognize their differences and not make stereotypes based on their culture or make assumptions about them. So we also respect community relationships and hierarchies in various cultures. And we want to make sure that we're not impressing our personal cultural structure on anyone. And we need to recognize, and just to touch on the last point, in order to do that, we might need to educate ourselves about certain cultures. There are a lot of cultures that I don't really know anything about, and I think it would be hard for me to not impress maybe an individualistic Western perspective on a certain group, because it's just what I naturally default to as a Western individualistic person. But if I learn about the culture and I learn about their hierarchies and their structures within their community, then I can be better aware about not inserting my biases or values. We can also recognize outside oppression that exists and share that to help clients understand maybe their own internalized oppression and racism. So we know that there are a variety of these forces that happen to people of minority groups, particularly in the United States. But of course, if we were practicing somewhere else, we would want to know what types of oppression exist in different cultures. But Yeah, so we want to kind of point that out, that there might be some environmental factors that contribute to negative views of self, or even just some harmful self-talk or views that the person might have if they've internalized that oppression. And counselors share the values inherent in the group process. So we create norms and expectations and values in group. And we usually do that in our informed consent process when we're recruiting for the group. So you, of course, would provide an informed consent either in the first group or before the group starts when you're recruiting for the group that outlines the process. And then in the first group, you're gonna have a norm setting session, basically, where you talk about confidentiality, the limits to confidentiality, how we want to treat each other in the group. And that can be co-constructed with the group members so that they all have buy-in into the group process. So you might, create a poster that has the rules that you create in the group so that everyone feels safe and comfortable and respected. And then we, as counselors, we promote egalitarianism. So we're going to treat everyone equally, and we're going to put ourselves on an equal playing field with the members of the group. Obviously, we're the leader, but we're going to treat everyone with equality and respect. Counselors also establish norms that promote equality, warmth, and respect for cultural differences. So I talked about those rules and norms that we would create at the beginning of the group. And so you want to make sure that those include, respect for different cultures, respect for diversity, and warmth. And so that you're building a culture of respect. And counselors model appropriate relationship skills and build relationships with all members. So you are working on your relationship with everyone, and you're treating everyone with equality and respect to try to model that for your group members. And, we know that part of the counseling role is advocacy. So you're going to advocate with and on behalf of group members from a social justice perspective. So your group may be on a specific topic, but maybe something you discuss is how to assert yourself in certain situations that are, in safe ways, and ways that can help your group members grow and be more successful in their communities. And then you can also advocate on behalf of group members as well when it's appropriate, by reaching out to institutions and helping ease transitions or working conditions or school conditions or whatever the case may be. You also want to consider that ethical issues can come up with a co-leadership model. So sometimes you'll be running a group by yourself. Sometimes you'll be running it with a co-leader. And co-leadership in group can be beneficial to model healthy relationships. So it's a really good opportunity to kind of show the group how you treat each other and model appropriate behavior. But it can be problematic if the relationship is dysfunctional, competitive, or if there's an imbalance in sharing or over-dependence on a co-facilitator. So if one person is doing all the heavy lifting and one person kind of just sits back, or if there's competition for airtime, those things are not going to be helpful to the group. If the group, if it becomes the co-counselor group show, then it's not really focused on the group, right? Communication is necessary before the group starts to get on the same page about philosophy and approach to group work. And problems with co-facilitators can split the group. And then you just have a very dysfunctional group on your hands. And co-facilitators must be committed to resolving issues that emerge in group leadership as they emerge. So they would want to talk before and after group to try to get on the same page. So obviously the purpose of group therapy is to help, it's a peer model to help support one another. And sometimes that means confronting members, and it means that the group will confront other members of the group in order to help them grow. But as long as if we're modeling healthy communication, we can facilitate a healthy process and group. But obviously, if there are issues with the leaders, it's going to deteriorate the ability of the group to communicate very well. Some ethical issues in group membership include informed consent, screening and selection, preparing group participants, involuntary participation, and freedom to leave the group. So, informed consent. We obviously want to provide an informed consent and, parental consent forms if the group is for minors. As with any type of counseling, we want to make sure that we give people a choice and that we let them know what the boundaries are, what the limits are, and what to expect from the group process. We always want to be transparent with group members about what to expect. So that's in written form and verbal form. So screening and selection. So you want to screen and select. You are not going to just choose any old person to be a part of your group. So obviously you're going to create a group that is specific for a purpose to help the members grow in some way. So you want to pick specific people to promote your group goals. So you're probably going to want to pick a diverse array of members, like not 3 people who are going to be loud and boisterous and take control. You want to balance those members so that there's a good back and forth. Obviously, if there's someone who is maybe not appropriate for the group for whatever reason, maybe they're too emotionally vulnerable, or maybe they have social issues that would impair healthy facilitation of the group, then you would want to be mindful of that and not invite them into the group. Maybe they're better suited for individual counseling, and that's okay too. And you don't want to select someone that's going to be harmful, abusive, or inappropriate who will hurt others in the group that are emotionally vulnerable. You do want to prepare the group participants. So in this informed consent process and during screening and selection, you're going to meet with each person individually to let them know what the group is about. And you can prep them and let them know what to expect. You provide informed consent. And if they decide to be a part of the group, you let them know when and where, and whether it's an open or closed group, what the purpose of the group is, what they can expect from the group, how many weeks it lasts, just all the nuts and bolts. Involuntary participation is another issue. So some people may be mandated into group counseling for, drug, any type of crime, drugs, domestic violence types of situations. So that brings forth even more challenges, but that's why that informed consent and letting people know what's required is important. And at the end of the day, even if it is involuntary, people always have a choice. They have a choice whether or not to participate. They have a choice whether or not they decide to show. I mean, there may be consequences for that, but it is still a choice at the end of the day. And freedom to leave the group. So you need to let them know if it's an open or closed group, how that might impact the group if they leave, and kind of what the procedure would be for leaving the group. If it's an open group, it's a little easier to leave. If it's a closed group, it's better to stick through with however many weeks the group is. And then, of course, voluntary versus involuntary participation would affect that. You want to let people know when you're preparing them in the informed consent stage that there are psychological risks, and that, being vulnerable in front of a group of people might not be the easiest thing in the world, but they also might experience some great benefits if they can, get some insight from other people, have some shared experiences, sharing vulnerability, getting support, all those things. But yeah, it can be very vulnerable and risky to share personal information in a group setting. You also want to explain confidentiality, because confidentiality is not guaranteed in a group setting. You're going to encourage it. You're going to set it as a norm. But at the end of the day, you can control the confidentiality level that exists between you and your client. And you can guarantee that you will not share confidential information unless, there's an exception to confidentiality that makes you break that. But you can't control what other people in the group do. And so you want to make that very clear, that it is a safe space and that we want to uphold confidentiality, but that it's not guaranteed. And so to think about that before sharing. You want to share limits to confidentiality with minors, because obviously parents do have the right to information about their child, even though we want to uphold confidentiality as much as possible. And then you want to share specifics around confidentiality with online groups. So, obviously that poses a different set of risks in different issues related to confidentiality. So if it's online, it's less safe than if you're sitting in a room. But depending on the program you're using and all of those things, you would just want to outline what the risks truly are. Let's talk group techniques. It is unethical for group leaders to use techniques that are unfamiliar, that serve a hidden agenda or enhance power, to solely create an intense atmosphere, or to pressure members or deprive them of their dignity. As therapists, we would never do that, right? But there are certain institutions where power and control are commonplace, like in the juvenile justice or the justice system. So in detention centers, prisons, that can be a common coercive technique to gain control and power over inmates. But of course, if you're a therapist, it's unethical to engage in that type of behavior in a therapeutic group. Techniques should have a therapeutic purpose. We're not just throwing out techniques for the heck of it. We have a reason we're doing what we're doing. Techniques should be grounded in a theoretical framework. The client's self-exploration should be fostered. We should modify techniques based on culture, environment, developmental level, all those things. Group members have a choice at all times about participation. And, well, I guess they don't always have a choice, but they always have some choice over their level of participation, if that makes sense. If it's a mandated group, they may have to show up and they may have to share something, but they don't have to share their entire life story if they don't want to. They have control over their information. And it's important to be aware of possible impact of techniques. So if it's a risky technique or one that might make the group vulnerable, it's just important to know that could happen and that's a possibility, and what the consequences could be of that technique. Of course, we talked a little bit about confidentiality before, so we want to encourage confidentiality in the group, but we can't guarantee it. It's good to discuss that this should be a technology-free zone if you're having a group in person, because no recording of the group should happen, no photos should be taken, all that stuff to try to protect confidentiality. And you would, again, discuss limits to confidentiality in online groups and discuss boundaries online. So for instance, like that you will not accept friend requests, or what your boundaries are in terms of social media. So termination can be an ethical issue. It begins in the first session with informed consent. So I know that sounds a little crazy that termination begins at the beginning of the relationship, but you're going to outline in the informed consent document when the end of the group occurs. So if you're in a closed group, you want someone to be committed to the group for 8 or 10 weeks or however long the group is. You would outline that in the informed consent. And you would want to talk about, payment and other issues right from the get-go. And you want to review progress, goals, accomplished, and successes. So when you actually are terminating at the end of the group, this is when you really celebrate those successes, review those goals, talk about how much has been accomplished, and have a sort of a celebration just to send them off into the world. Termination in open groups is a little different. So in open groups, people are free to leave and come and go at any time. It's always a good idea to encourage the member to provide notice, because if someone becomes a part of the group and then all of a sudden they're gone, people might worry about them. It might become an issue with other group members that have sort of come to depend on them for emotional support. And you can ease the transition by processing with the group members. And ideal termination includes a mutually agreed upon termination with counselor and the member, and is processed with the group. So maybe it's time and the person feels ready to move on. it's just a good idea to, in an ideal world, to try to discuss that with the counselor, have it mutually be agreed upon, and then find a way to transition out of the group that affects the other group members as little as possible. However, in an open group, it is just that. And so people do come and go, and that may impact other members, but it's also good to process those feelings in the group to try to minimize the impact. And that's all I have for you on group work. As I mentioned before, you will have a full group class to discuss the ins and outs of group work. Because if this is one of your first classes, you may be thinking, I don't really know anything about how to run a group. And that's okay, because you're going to take an entire course on it. So you will learn all the different issues that apply. And you will likely review all these ethical concerns too. So anyway, that's all I've got. I'm going to stop my share. And I hope you have a great day. Thanks a lot. See you next time.